The changes started small, almost imperceptible, like the faintest crack in an otherwise pristine glass. My wife, Emily, had always been a creature of habit. She thrived on routine, her days a careful orchestration of work, home, and the occasional indulgence in her creative hobbies. For years, I admired that about her, the steadiness she brought to our marriage. It made me feel anchored, safe. But then, almost overnight, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There were no late-night calls or whispers that cut off when I entered the room. It was subtle, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. Except I was looking, because the steady rhythm of our life had started to falter. Emily began coming home later than usual, her explanations vague. Meetings ran over, traffic was bad. A colleague needed to talk. It wasn't unusual for her to be busy. Her job as a marketing executive often demanded long hours, but the frequency of these late nights grew. And with each one, an invisible wall seemed to rise between us. First, I brushed it off. Everyone goes through phases, I told myself. Relationships have their ebbs and flows. But then, the small inconsistencies started to pile up. A message on her phone she quickly swiped away. A business trip that seemed unnecessary. A distant look in her eyes when she thought I wasn't watching. I told myself not to be paranoid, but doubt had a way of taking root, spreading through my thoughts like ivy. The first tangible clue came on a Sunday afternoon. Emily was in the shower, and her phone, usually glued to her side, buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a message, the preview visible on the lock screen. I can't stop thinking about Friday night. When can I see you again? My heart stopped. The sender's name was just initials, MJ. But that didn't matter. The words were enough to set my mind racing. I wanted to unlock the phone, to read the full message, but the screen went dark before I could move. I stood there, frozen, until Emily's voice called from the bathroom, asking me to grab her towel. The moment passed, but the seed of suspicion had been firmly planted. Over the next few days, I became hyper-aware of Emily's behavior. Every smile, every laugh, every touch felt scrutinized under the weight of what I thought I knew. She seemed oblivious to my growing unease, her demeanor unchanged. But I couldn't shake the image of that message, the casual intimacy it implied. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to dig deeper. I knew it was a breach of trust, but I couldn't silence the voice in my head telling me something was wrong. While Emily slept soundly beside me, I unlocked her phone using the passcode I'd seen her enter countless times. My hands trembled as I navigated to her messages. MJ was there, just as I'd feared. Their conversation was short but damning. They referenced meetings that didn't exist, moments stolen during Emily's so-called late nights at the office. There were no explicit declarations of love or passion, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't professional. It wasn't innocent. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I copied the messages to my phone, a grim insurance policy. I needed time to process what I'd found, to decide what my next move should be. The betrayal felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, each breath a struggle. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed more signs. Emily started dressing differently, trading her usual casual attire for sleek, form-fitting outfits that seemed designed to impress. She spent more time on her appearance, her makeup and hair meticulously done even on days she claimed were spent in endless meetings. She bought new lingerie, something she hadn't done in years, and her explanations for these purchases were flippant, dismissive. One evening, when she said she was working late, I decided to follow her. Felt wrong, invasive, but the doubt had consumed me. I needed to know. I trailed her car through the city, my heart pounding with every turn. She didn't go to her office, as she had claimed, but to a small boutique hotel tucked away on a quiet street. From the shadows of the parking lot, I watched as she stepped out of her car, her phone pressed to her ear, and walked inside. She didn't emerge for hours. I didn't confront her that night. Couldn't. Instead, I sat in the darkened living room, replaying every moment of our marriage in my mind. The happy memories felt tainted now, their joy overshadowed by the knowledge of what Emily had done. I wondered how long this had been going on, how many times she had looked me in the eye and lied. When she finally came home, she acted as though nothing was wrong. She kissed my cheek, asked about my day, and went upstairs to shower. I watched her, wondering how she could be so casual, so unaffected. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I held back. The confrontation would come, but not yet. I needed to be ready, to have all the pieces in place. Over the next few days, I gathered more evidence. I reviewed her credit card statements, cross-referencing the dates of her so-called business trips with the charges for the hotel. I checked her email, finding messages to MJ that mirrored the tone of their texts. I even installed a small GPS tracker in her car, a step that felt both necessary and deeply invasive. What I uncovered confirmed what I already knew. Emily had been meeting MJ regularly, their encounters carefully planned and hidden behind the veneer of her professional life. The betrayal was as calculated as it was complete. By the time I was ready to confront her, I felt hollow. The anger that had burned so brightly in the beginning had dulled to a cold resolve. This wasn't about salvaging our marriage anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. I had spent too long living in the shadow of her lies, and I was ready to step into the light. That night, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I laid everything out. The messages, the hotel receipts, the GPS logs. I watched as the color drained from her face, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of the evidence. She tried to deny it at first, to explain it away, but the truth was undeniable. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. The life we had built together was over, but I wasn't broken. I was ready to rebuild, to move forward without her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was mine to walk, and I intended to walk it with my head held high. The fallout from that night was swift and brutal. Emily sat across from me, her face a mask of shock and disbelief as I laid bare every detail of her betrayal. She tried to interrupt, to defend herself, but I didn't let her. The evidence I had gathered left no room for explanations, no space for lies. When I was done, there was nothing left to say. She stayed silent for what felt like an eternity, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. She admitted to the affair, to the lies and the secrecy. But as she talked, something about her tone felt off. It wasn't just regret or shame. There was something else, something I couldn't quite place. In the days that followed, Emily moved into the guest bedroom. We didn't talk much, our conversations limited to practical matters. Groceries, bills, work schedules. The silence between us was deafening, a chasm that grew wider with each passing day. Ethan, our 7-year-old son, seemed oblivious to the tension, but I knew it was only a matter of time before he started asking questions. I found myself oscillating between anger and sadness, my emotions swinging like a pendulum. Some days, I felt like confronting her again, demanding answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted to ask. Other days, I wanted to retreat, to bury my head in the sand and pretend none of it had happened. But the betrayal was always there, a constant presence that refused to be ignored. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from the GPS tracker I had installed in Emily's car. She had told me she was going to the grocery store, but the tracker showed her heading in the opposite direction, toward the outskirts of town. My heart raced as I watched her movements on the screen, a mix of dread and curiosity compelling me to follow her. I grabbed my keys and drove in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The tracker led me to an industrial area on the edge of the city, a cluster of warehouses and empty lots bathed in the dim glow of streetlights. I parked a safe distance away and watched as Emily's car pulled into a lot behind one of the buildings. She got out and disappeared inside, her figure swallowed by the shadows. My mind raced with possibilities. Was she meeting MJ? Or was this something else entirely? I waited for what felt like hours before she emerged, carrying a small, unmarked box. She placed it in the trunk and drove away, her taillights vanishing into the night. I didn't follow her home. Instead, I sat in my car, staring at the warehouse, my mind a whirlwind of questions. The next day, while Emily was at work, I decided to search her car. It felt invasive, but I couldn't ignore what I'd seen the night before. The box was still in the trunk, tucked away beneath a blanket. My hands shook as I opened it, my breath catching in my throat as I saw what was inside. It was filled with cash, stacks of bills neatly bundled together. There was no note, no explanation, just an unmarked box containing what had to be thousands of dollars. I stared at it, my mind racing. Where had it come from? And why was Emily hiding it? I closed the box and put it back exactly as I'd found it, my thoughts churning as I tried to make sense of the discovery. The affair with MJ had been devastating enough, but this was something else entirely. Emily wasn't just hiding a relationship. She was hiding a secret life. Determined to uncover the truth, I contacted the private investigator I had hired before. I told him about the warehouse, the box of cash, and my growing suspicion that Emily's betrayal went far deeper than I'd realized. He agreed to look into it, promising to be discreet. A few days later, he called with an update. The warehouse, he explained, was linked to a man named Marcus Jennings. MJ Marcus wasn't just Emily's lover. He was also a known figure in the city's underground economy. He had connections to everything from illegal gambling rings to money laundering operations. My stomach churned as the pieces began to fall into place. Emily wasn't just having an affair. She was entangled in something far more dangerous. That evening, I confronted Emily again, this time armed with the information from the investigator. I told her what I'd discovered about Marcus, about the warehouse, about the cash in her car. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. She denied everything at first, her voice rising in panic. But as I pressed her, her defenses crumbled. She admitted that she had met Marcus through a friend, that their relationship had started innocently but had quickly spiraled into something she couldn't control. She claimed the cash was part of a favor she had done for him, though she refused to elaborate on what that favor entailed. Her tears came quickly, but they did little to move me. I'd heard enough lies to last a lifetime. I told Emily that her actions had put our family in danger, that I could no longer trust her to be part of our lives. I gave her an ultimatum. She could come clean about everything, including her involvement with Marcus, or I would go to the authorities. Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she might tell me the truth. But instead, she gathered her things and left, slamming the door behind her. As I sat alone in the empty house, I felt a strange mix of relief and despair. The woman I had loved, the life we had built together, was gone. All that remained were the pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. The days following Emily's departure were eerily quiet, the silence in the house amplifying the chaos in my mind. The echoes of her confession, and the unanswered questions that lingered, were a constant presence. I oscillated between anger, sadness, and a growing determination to uncover the full extent of her involvement with Marcus. Whatever she had become entangled in, it was no longer just her secret. It was my life too, and I needed to understand what I was up against. The private investigator called with more findings, his voice carefully measured. He had delved deeper into Marcus Jennings' background, uncovering a network of illicit operations that stretched far beyond our city. Marcus wasn't just dabbling in illegal activities. He was orchestrating them. From money laundering to underground gambling, he had his hands in everything. The investigator also found records of transactions linked to Marcus that matched the cash withdrawals from Emily's hidden account. The sums were significant, and they pointed to a troubling possibility. Emily had been actively participating in his schemes. Whether out of coercion or complicity, she was more deeply involved than I'd feared. With the investigator's help, I began piecing together a timeline. The affair with Marcus had started nearly a year ago, around the same time Emily's behavior had shifted. What began as a personal indiscretion had evolved into something far more sinister. Her late nights, the unexplained absences, the box of cash. All of it was tied to Marcus and his operations. But there was still so much I didn't understand. Why had she gotten involved in the first place? Was she coerced, or had she chosen this path willingly? And perhaps most pressing of all, what did Marcus intend to do now that she had left? One evening, as I sat at my desk reviewing the investigator's findings, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was brief but chilling. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The message was a clear warning, but it only strengthened my resolve. Whoever had sent it, whether it was Marcus or someone acting on his behalf, wanted me to back down. That meant I was getting close to something they didn't want me to find. I forwarded the message to the investigator and called him immediately. He urged caution, reminding me that Marcus was a dangerous man. But he also acknowledged that the message was proof we were on the right track. If Marcus felt threatened, it meant we were uncovering something important. A week later, Emily showed up at the house unannounced. She looked disheveled, her usually polished appearance replaced by a frazzled, almost desperate demeanor. She asked to come in, and despite my better judgment, I let her. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes darted around the room, as though she were afraid someone might be watching. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. She admitted that she had made a mistake getting involved with Marcus but insisted that she had been coerced. According to her, Marcus had used her initial infidelity as leverage, threatening to expose the affair if she didn't cooperate. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to see her as a victim rather than a willing participant. But the evidence, the transactions, the box of cash, the lies, painted a different picture. I told her as much, and her reaction was one of quiet resignation. She didn't deny her role but pleaded with me to help her get out. Emily's plea forced me to confront a difficult truth. As much as I wanted to walk away from her and the mess she had created, I couldn't. Not completely. Her actions had pulled me into a dangerous world, and if Marcus decided to come after her, or me, I needed to be prepared. The investigator and I devised a plan. If Emily was willing to cooperate, we could use her as a means to gather more evidence against Marcus. The goal was to build a case strong enough to bring him down, using the information we'd already uncovered as leverage. It was a risky strategy, but it was the only way to ensure our safety. Emily agreed, albeit reluctantly. She provided us with details about Marcus' operations, including the locations of safe houses and the names of key associates. The information was invaluable, but it also put her in greater danger. If Marcus found out she was cooperating, the consequences would be severe. With Emily's help, we set a trap for Marcus. The investigator contacted law enforcement, and together we orchestrated a sting operation. Emily arranged a meeting with Marcus under the guise of delivering another payment, while undercover officers prepared to intercept. The night of the operation, the tension was palpable. I stayed at home, my phone clutched tightly in my hand as I waited for updates. The minutes dragged on, each one stretching into an eternity. Finally, the investigator called to inform me that the operation had been a success. Marcus had been arrested, along with several of his associates. The evidence we had gathered was enough to ensure they would face significant charges. In the weeks that followed, the pieces of my life began to settle into place. Marcus' arrest brought a sense of relief, but it also left a void. The danger was gone, but so was the structure that had defined my existence for months. Emily's betrayal had fractured our marriage beyond repair, and we both knew there was no going back. We finalized our divorce quietly, without fanfare or bitterness. Emily moved to a different city, hoping to rebuild her life away from the shadows of her past. As for me, I focused on Ethan and the future we could create together. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to walk, free from the lies and deceit that had once defined it. With Marcus behind bars and the immediate danger seemingly neutralized, I thought I could finally begin to breathe again. Life had been a chaotic whirlwind for months, but now there was a chance to rebuild. My focus shifted entirely to Ethan, ensuring that the turbulence of recent events affected him as little as possible. It was easier said than done, though. Children are perceptive, and while he hadn't asked any direct questions, his curious glances and quiet moments of observation told me he knew more than he let on. Emily's absence had left a void, one that we both felt but dealt with in different ways. For Ethan, it was the small, tangible things. Her voice calling him for dinner, her presence at his soccer games. For me, it was more complicated. Her betrayal was like a phantom pain, a dull ache that flared up in unexpected moments. But as much as I wanted to move on, life had other plans. One morning, as I sifted through the usual pile of bills and junk mail, an envelope caught my attention. It was unmarked and plain, with no return address. I opened it cautiously, my heart sinking as I read the handwritten note inside. You think it's over, but you don't know the whole story. Meet me at the old pier tonight, or you'll regret it. The note wasn't signed, but the implications were clear. Someone wanted to meet, and they knew enough to rattle me. My first instinct was to ignore it, to chalk it up to a prank or someone trying to stir up trouble. But the timing and the ominous tone felt too deliberate to dismiss. I debated whether to involve the investigator or law enforcement, but ultimately decided to go alone. If this was connected to Marcus or Emily's past, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. That night, under the cover of darkness, I drove to the old pier. The pier was deserted, its wooden planks creaking underfoot as I made my way to the designated spot. A figure emerged from the shadows, their face obscured by a hood. As they stepped closer, the dim light from a nearby lamppost revealed someone I didn't recognize. A woman, likely in her late 30s, with sharp features and piercing eyes. She introduced herself as Veronica, a name that meant nothing to me. But her next words sent a chill down my spine. She claimed to have worked with Marcus, though she insisted she had severed ties with him long before his arrest. According to her, there were layers to his operation that neither Emily nor I had uncovered. Veronica handed me a folder, its contents a mix of photographs, financial records, and handwritten notes. She explained that Marcus had been running a side operation that involved identity theft and blackmail. Emily, she claimed, wasn't just a pawn. She had been a willing participant, using her marketing expertise to help Marcus target wealthy individuals for exploitation. I refused to believe it. Emily's involvement in Marcus's schemes was already a bitter pill to swallow, but this was something else entirely. Veronica seemed to sense my skepticism and pointed to a specific document in the folder. An email exchange between Emily and Marcus that detailed their plans in explicit terms. My stomach churned as I read the words, each sentence a nail in the coffin of the woman I thought I knew. Veronica's revelations threw everything into disarray. The narrative I had constructed, that Emily had been coerced, a victim of circumstances, crumbled under the weight of the evidence. I spent the following days poring over the contents of the folder, cross-referencing the details with what I already knew. The pieces fit too perfectly to dismiss. I reached out to the investigator, sharing what I had learned. His response was measured but firm. This new information had to be brought to law enforcement. Emily's partial cooperation during Marcus's arrest had earned her some leniency, but this would change everything. It was likely she'd face charges of her own if the authorities confirmed her deeper involvement. As I wrestled with this decision, Emily called. Her voice was hesitant, tinged with a vulnerability that felt almost manipulative in hindsight. She wanted to meet to talk about how we could move forward for Ethan's sake. I agreed, though my intentions were far from reconciliation. I needed answers, and she was the only one who could provide them. We met at a cafe downtown, the neutral setting doing little to ease the tension. Emily looked tired, her polished exterior giving way to signs of stress. I wasted no time, laying the folder on the table between us and demanding an explanation. Her initial reaction was one of denial, but as I pressed her, her composure cracked. She admitted to helping Marcus but insisted it had started as a way to protect herself. According to her, Marcus had threatened to expose the affair unless she cooperated. Over time, her role had expanded, and she had become entangled in his schemes out of fear and desperation. I wanted to believe her, to cling to the idea that she had been a victim rather than a willing participant. But the evidence, the emails, the financial records told a different story. She had played a significant role in Marcus's operations, and her actions had put not only herself but our family at risk. When I told her I planned to take the folder to the authorities, her expression shifted to one of panic. She pleaded with me to reconsider, to think about what it would mean for Ethan if she went to prison. Her words cut deep, but my resolve remained firm. This wasn't just about her. It was about the truth and the consequences of her choices. Before I could act on my decision, another twist emerged. The investigator called with startling news. Veronica had been arrested. She had been using her connection to Marcus as leverage, feeding selective information to people like me while running her own cons on the side. The folder she had given me was a mix of genuine evidence and fabricated details designed to sow chaos and manipulate the situation to her advantage. This revelation turned everything on its head. If some of the evidence against Emily was false, how much of it could be trusted? I felt like a puppet, my strings pulled by forces I couldn't fully comprehend. The certainty I had clung to was gone, replaced by a murky sea of doubt. In the end, I made the difficult decision to present the folder to law enforcement, along with a statement about its questionable origins. I wanted the truth to come out, even if it meant exposing my own missteps in handling the situation. The authorities launched a deeper investigation, one that would take months to unravel. As for Emily, the uncertainty of her fate weighed heavily on both of us. She remained in the city, her visits with Ethan closely monitored. Our interactions were civil but strained, the love we had once shared replaced by a fragile truce. Through it all, I focused on Ethan. He was my anchor, the one constant in a life that had been turned upside down. I didn't know what the future held, but I was determined to navigate it with honesty and integrity, for his sake and mine. The months following Veronica's arrest and the exposure of her deception were a blur of legal proceedings, emotional upheaval, and a desperate search for clarity. The folder she had given me, while partially fabricated, contained enough truth to keep Emily under scrutiny. Law enforcement launched a broader investigation, pulling in threads from Marcus's network and untangling the web of lies that had ensnared everyone involved. Through it all, I found myself oscillating between hope and despair. On one hand, the justice system was finally addressing the crimes that had upended my life. On the other, the uncertainty of Emily's fate cast a long shadow over everything, leaving me to navigate an unfamiliar world where trust felt like a foreign concept. Emily's visits with Ethan became increasingly strained. Though she tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, her unease was palpable. Ethan, ever perceptive, began asking questions I couldn't fully answer. Why wasn't Mommy staying with us? Why did she always look so sad? Each query felt like a dagger, a reminder of the life we had lost and the innocence Ethan was forced to relinquish far too soon. Despite the tumult, I focused on creating stability for him. Our days became a patchwork of routines designed to shield him from the worst of the fallout. Soccer practices, school projects, and weekend trips to the park became the anchors of our new normal. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't entirely shield him from the truth. When the trial began, it felt like the final chapter of a long, harrowing journey. Emily's role in Marcus's schemes was dissected in excruciating detail, her emails and financial records laid bare for all to see. She maintained her claim that she had been coerced, painting herself as a victim trapped in an impossible situation. Her defense was compelling, but the prosecution's evidence was damning. The courtroom became a theater of competing narratives, each side presenting a version of events that felt equally plausible and equally devastating. I attended every session, both out of a sense of duty and a desperate need for closure. Watching Emily on the stand was a surreal experience. She was no longer the woman I had married, the partner I had shared my life with. She was a stranger, her expressions and gestures unfamiliar, her words carefully chosen to elicit sympathy. As the trial neared its conclusion, a new witness emerged. One of Marcus's former associates who had struck a deal with the prosecution. His testimony was a bombshell, revealing details about Marcus's operations that had previously been hidden. Among them was a revelation that changed everything. Marcus had manipulated Emily from the very beginning, fabricating evidence of her complicity to keep her under his control. The associate's testimony painted Emily in a new light, casting doubt on her culpability and suggesting that her involvement had been more a product of fear than malice. While it didn't absolve her entirely, it shifted the narrative, forcing the court to reconsider her role in Marcus's schemes. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something resembling hope. In the end, the jury delivered a nuanced verdict. Emily was found guilty of several charges but was spared the harshest penalties due to the mitigating circumstances revealed during the trial. She was sentenced to probation, along with mandatory community service and counseling. The decision was met with mixed reactions: relief from her legal team, outrage from some of Marcus's other victims, and a complex blend of emotions from me. The verdict marked the end of one chapter but left many questions unanswered. Emily's freedom came with conditions, and her ability to rebuild her life would depend on her willingness to confront the choices that had led her here. For my part, I was left to grapple with a profound sense of ambivalence. I was glad she hadn't been completely destroyed by the system, but the damage she had done to our family was irreversible. In the weeks following the trial, Emily reached out to me, asking for a chance to explain herself. I agreed to meet her, though my expectations were low. We sat across from each other in a small cafe, the distance between us both physical and emotional. She spoke haltingly, her words a mixture of apology and self-reflection. She admitted to making terrible choices, to letting fear and pride cloud her judgment. She didn't ask for forgiveness but expressed a genuine desire to repair what could be salvaged, primarily her relationship with Ethan. I listened, my emotions a swirling mix of anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of compassion. For all her faults, Emily was still Ethan's mother, and I couldn't deny him the chance to rebuild that bond. Rebuilding wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Emily's visits with Ethan became more regular, though they remained supervised for a time. Slowly, cautiously, she began to earn back a measure of trust. Not with me, but with him. Watching them together, I saw glimpses of the woman I had once loved, though I knew we could never return to what we had been. As for me, I found solace in the simplicity of everyday life. I threw myself into work, rediscovered old hobbies, and began to forge new connections. Over time, the wounds Emily's betrayal had inflicted began to heal, leaving scars that served as reminders of both pain and resilience. One evening, as Ethan and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me with a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think we'll ever be a family again?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "We are a family," I said. "It might look different than it did before, but we're still a team, and we always will be." Looking back, I see the journey we've been on as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Emily's betrayal, Marcus's manipulation, Veronica's deception. Each piece of the puzzle was a challenge that forced me to confront my own limitations and resilience. Through it all, one truth has remained constant. Life is messy, unpredictable, and often unfair, but it is also filled with opportunities for growth, redemption, and connection. For every betrayal, there is a chance to rebuild. For every wound, there is a path to healing. As I move forward, I carry these lessons with me, knowing that the past will always be a part of me but no longer defines me. The future is uncertain, but it is mine to shape one choice at a time.